Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day 6 of Caribbean Women Honors and Empowerment 16 Days of Activism interview series. And this evening, we were supposed to have an anonymous child, and the child is not comfortable with going live, even though there would have been a no camera and an alias name. And we do understand because sometimes, when you talk about an interview, it's fresh in their mind. So with me is Mrs. Marsha Bailey-Owen, our Social Services Director, and we are going to have a very nice informal 30-minute conversation with you all concerning children matter. So Mrs. Bailey-Owen, over to you.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be here. And it is unfortunate that the child is not here this evening, but we understand because, like any form of trauma, any form of abuse, it is sometimes difficult to talk about, even as adults. More so a child. But we, as you said, we will have a discussion. So one of the things I really wanted us to look at is, there's a perception with a lot of women and men who are victims of abuse that they stay in the abuse for the sake of the children. Sometimes they tell you, I've been in this for 12 years, 15 years,
Mhm.
but I'm not leaving because my children too young. And I really want to talk today a little bit about that, having been in the place as a social worker in schools, where a lot of the children would have, spoken about, Miss, they don't understand how hard it is to see
Mhm.
daddy beating mommy, or they don't understand that why mommy don't leave, why mommy don't leave, and so one of the things that I want to see, and for parents to know, adults to know that, just as the abuse affects you, it affects the child. And so the children are very aware that this form of, and I want to say pretense that there's a family,
Mhm.
is really, truly not, truly not a real issue.
Right.
So one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that, that they're not helping the children. They're not helping the children.
Agree. I mean, it's such a catch-22, Marsha, because they say who feels it knows. And so you're caught between a rock and a hard place, literally. So, for example, you may have a scenario where you have uh, a family and the mother wants to leave, but then she doesn't want to leave because of the children. But what about the children is making her want to stay? Is it the provision? Is it the financial side of it? Because putting your children through that sort of torture and torment emotionally and mentally is one scenario. But and I have to go back to when we went to Library to sensitize the area, when people spoke about children, it was in the context of the perpetrator being the breadwinner, which is one of the reasons that is highlighted why women stay because of the children. So for me, I believe whilst there may be more scenarios, it is an opportunity for us to ensure that women are financially empowered, financially educated, and understand that it's okay to be that way. Because culturally, religiously, politically, the list is endless where people feel the need not to become financially independent because they believe that based on cultural upbringing that the man's role is to take care of them and the man's role is to provide for them. And whilst the man's role is the role of a provider, at the end of the day, there are things, there are scenarios where women have to become more financially independent. And even if I know someone who is receiving a monthly allowance, and from the monthly allowance, they save, they invest. And as a result, there are times when you may need to step up a little bit, but to be in a scenario for a lack of finances is not the best place to be. We need to be more financially empowered, educated, etc.
Correct. I, having talked to women, when they talk about staying for the sake of the children, yes,
Hmm.
the financial situation is one, but in their mind, it is that I am providing stability to my
Right.
child. It just as they say, it's difficult. It's difficult to for them to leave. It's difficult for them to go and go on their own. Going with children is sometimes just as hard, is
Right.
just as hard for some women, so they do stay because of in their minds, I am providing this stability to my child, not recognizing that everything that you are exposed to, or that um you experience, the child also experience the same
Yes.
you know
Correct. I totally agree. And also, even when they're thinking stability, I believe that they look at the scenario and they're probably looking at the home and all the amenities in the home, everything that the husband may have been providing. But at the end of
Correct.
the day, you stay for that sort of visual gain, because I don't want to say for material things, but for
Yes,
that
yes.
sort of visual gain. But then a lot of times, both women and men, because we're dealing with abuse on both sides of the divide, a lot of the times they don't realize that children know a lot more than they say. So
Yes.
whilst you may be hiding the bruises with your makeup from your colleagues and maybe your neighbors and maybe whoever, there
Hmm.
are times in the still of the night when you are on the receiving end of the violence, the children are hearing. The children
Yes.
having conversation with siblings. Children don't even know what to say or what to do. So when you think you're saving them from one area, you're exposing them to
Exposing
another.
them to another. Correct. That is so true, and that's how the children are able to see. When they think mommy not getting licks, they could tell you ideally. I know this is happening because I hear, or sometimes I
Yes.
see. I see.
And I think also one of the other things I will mention as well, sometimes you have the situation where children have an opportunity to maybe speak to a guidance counselor, maybe speak
Mm.
to a relative, maybe speak to somebody who they could trust. But then you have that age gap between 0 to 3,
Correct.
where they're not speaking properly yet.
Yes. Yes.
They're
They are
just
able to put it
starting.
into words. Yes.
Yes. So they cannot communicate it in words. So then it requires people with experience and discernment to recognize that this child going through something.
Hmm.
Something is bothering this child. And how do we get that out of the child? How do we communicate? So now you have to have visual art where you're showing the child,
Play
are you
therapy.
comfortable with that's it?
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah. They have
comfortable at
played.
home?
Hmm.
Is this picture familiar to you? What about this
Yes.
picture is making you nervous and uncomfortable? You see something on where there's television, etc., and you just burst into tears because this is what I'm experiencing. So I think we need, and I would have spoken about communication a couple of days ago, but I
Yes.
didn't. You see that non-verbal communication, especially in,
Mm.
in, in, in the era of children at that 0 to 3. It really will be interesting to hear, coming down in the interview series when we speak to people like Mr. Marlon Bascom from the Children's
Children's
Authority,
authority.
and
Yes.
when we have the panel discussion, we have Nicola Harvey, who's the CEO of the Children's Authority, on that panel as well. It will be really interesting to hear some of the things that they have in place to address children from that place.
And they do, and I mean, having been at the Children's Authority, I can say that one of the training that was provided to members of
Mhm.
staff was in forensic interviewing, and the purpose of that was exactly to capture that age group. Even at student
Right.
support services,
Mhm.
when we were under Mr. Steve Williams and Joseph Ragunanan, one of the things that we did as social workers in education was to be able to go to learn play therapy, art therapy, just to be able to communicate with our infants.
Right.
Children's initial way of communicating is through play. And so sometimes when you looked at the play, I remember some years ago doing a play therapy session with a child. And so you allow them to use the whatever toy they may choose to
Mhm.
use, and the child was just taking this toy and banging the head of this toy against a wall.
Wow.
And, it is only when we were discussing with the mother what was happening, then she articulated, this is what the child sees. And this was one parent who said, I am staying so my child could have stability, not knowing that this is what the child was seeing and the child was responding to. And so we have to be mindful that children do feel, experience, go through some of the same things that the adult is just they are not always able to speak the same way or to articulate it the same way, and so they
Right.
act out. So you find that they may have eating disorders. If you talk to teachers, I say teachers have a lot of insight. You talk to teachers and the teachers tell you, Jane was doing all good in standard one, and then something happened in standard two. She
Hmm.
not as talk, she's not as talkative in class. She not interacting with the other students. Or all of a sudden, Jane's very aggressive. You're seeing Jane hitting and lashing, and so those are some of the early indicators that something may be happening in this child's life.
Wow.
And we really would have to commend when in 2002, I mean, we have always had family services, we have always had um, agencies that would discuss issues with adults. So family services dealt with the families. However, in 2004, with the introduction of school social workers under student support services, the main focus was to treat with those students who were victims of abuse, child abuse,
Wow.
domestic violence. And so they were placed specifically, yes, it was related to, of course, their functioning in the classroom, but it was geared specifically to be able to treat with those children. And so we do have, I mean, we have to commend the government of Trinidad and Tobago for ensuring that things are put in
Oh,
place to deal
definitely.
with our children. There was a whole
Definitely.
package, and I know Ms. Harvey, when she comes, and Mr. Bascom, they would talk more, but the government of Trinidad and Tobago saw it fit to have a package of legislation geared towards children, hence
Excellent.
the bringing on of the Children's Authority, because we recognize that the needs of children were not being adequately met. And so, even while Mr. Fields was on in between my little challenges with the internet, one of the things I heard him talk about, and it was also spoken about by Minister when she talked about the socialization, how
Yes.
we socialize our children, boys and girls, what we tell them, what we teach them, what we demonstrate, and the behaviors we model would be what they are, they model as adults. Research has
Hmm.
shown that children who are victims do, not all, but do themselves become perpetrators of violence if they have been exposed. And so we have to now reframe what we say to our young girls, what we say to our young
Yes.
boys. So I mean, the when we talk about elimination of violence, we cannot exclude the children. We cannot, because
Agreed.
it doesn't happen in isolation. It happens usually in a family setting, and the
Mhm.
children do experience, I wouldn't say the brunt of it, but they do experience a great deal of
Definitely.
the abuse themselves, you
I
know.
mean, I remember going to a particular police youth club to speak
Hmm.
to some children concerning bullying and so forth. And I was speaking about, believing in yourself, low self-esteem, and, operating from a place of love. And one of the police officers said to me during the break, Mr. Lewis, I don't know how you could fit it in, but we have a situation that we're trying to pull out. But if you could touch on abuse in the home where
Hmm.
children are concerned, find a way to slip it in. So I said, all right, let me see if I could find a way to slip this thing in. So I started talking to them and I said, one of the things in loving yourself, you have to be able to speak out if someone is saying or doing something to you that is considered inappropriate.
Right.
So I started talking to both the boys and the girls, and I said to the little girls, there are reasons why mommy will bathe you and mommy will, do certain things with you that daddy will not do. Doesn't mean that daddy doesn't love you or daddy is going to treat with you inappropriately, but it's the socially acceptable thing to do.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm talking along those lines, and we talk about, the shower and, when mommy bathes you or et cetera, et cetera. And I asked her, and is there anything anybody want to add? This is not school, but this is a very open discussion. So
Mm-hmm.
feel free to ask any questions. And this girl got up. She said, Miss, I want to ask something. I said, sure. She said, you mentioned a lot about daddy and mommy and people who not
Mm.
supposed to interfere with people. And just as she's talking, she said, but what about an uncle?
Oh.
Listen to me. I almost froze.
Mm-hmm.
So then I said to her, any male is inappropriate. And I hit the nail on the head because that's what they were trying to pull out from
Somehow.
counseling in school and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And we went to our next break. The Children's Authority was contacted, even the police, because it was a police youth club. So the police had to come in, those who specialize in those sort of things. So one of the things I wanted to say from that experience, our language has to change.
Correct, correct,
Because
correct.
even when Mr. Fields was speaking yesterday, and he was talking about the communication where we keep saying about male perpetrators, female, and we keep using the sex language as opposed to leaving it open because it happens on both sides of the divide. I really believe we need to change the language in terms of how we communicate the gender issues, because if a child is taking it word for word, they may think
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for the uncle because you didn't say uncle, you said daddy.
So, Daddy, correct, correct, correct. And this is one of the things I remember, now that I go back into my little history book, there was a child who was adamant, adamant, adamant. She did not want to call this gentleman uncle. And I remember when they brought the child to see
Mhm.
me, and in talking to the child, and the mother was adamant, but it's disrespectful. I'm saying, no, it's not. I mean, does he not have a name? He can be Mr. So and so,
Mhm.
so and so. But when you're saying uncle, uncle has a connotation of family, safety.
Correct.
And this particular uncle was interfering with this child. He was molesting this
Wow.
child. And so it was something that even after I had to stop and think, we force children to call persons, especially, and this is by no means knocking any mother who has a new partner and whatever, and you want to establish that boundary, that respect. You want to establish that, but respect doesn't necessarily come from saying uncle or auntie. And it's when that child was so adamant, but he's not my uncle, and I don't want to say uncle, that I had to revisit my own thinking that when a child is saying, listen, I don't want to say uncle because this
There's a
person is
reason.
not, there's a reason. And so we have to be very mindful when we are entering. That's why I was asking Denise, when she had to move to a new relationship, what
Mhm.
was it like for her daughter? What was it like, to introduce a new person? Because you would have seen the former husband being violent. And now you're
Yes.
asking me to accept somebody else. So we have to be very mindful. Remember that children are resilient.
Yes.
They have their own innate skills, their own intuition. And so if a child is very resistant about introducing this uncle and this familiar kind of relationship too soon, we as women, as persons in relationships or adults, we really need to listen to the child. We need to be
Agreed.
mindful of those situations. um as I was just saying that, I also remember, when parents don't believe,
That's a
children.
big one.
I have I have I think I will have to write a social work memoir at some point.
I think you
Not
should.
about stories. It's not the issue about the stories, but it's so that someone else can learn. I remember I had this client that was early. I had, in my early career, and the mother, she wasn't the abused one. She wasn't the abused. The stepfather would physically beat the child, because he said, he was one that you can't spare the rod and spoil the child needs discipline. So
Mhm.
he wouldn't hit the mother, but he would beat the child, and he would only beat this child when the mother wasn't there.
Mm.
And so when the child was talking about the violence, the mother was saying, but what nonsense are you talking? No, 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 no. And she really did not believe that he was beating. But children, I
Mm.
tell you, children really, they're resilient.
Yeah,
Some
but
one
you
of
know
her
there's a flip
friends
side.
told her some one of her friends told her to rub, I can't remember what it is now, rub it on when he beat you, rub this particular thing on it and it will swell and it will show your mother how you're getting licked. But I mean, the child, in
Wow.
talking to her and counseling her, we got the mother to realize, based on the stories and the frequency of what was happening, that
Hmm.
he was literally physically punishing the child, but not punishing, not well, not physically punishing the mother. She
Right,
later realized that she too was a victim. She was abused, but she was abused emotionally and financially.
right.
So as mothers, as fathers, as adults, if a child
Hmm.
says something, yes, you do your little research, but children 9 out of 10 times don't lie about these issues. They really don't. So believe, you have to
You know,
believe,
in
and then
interest,
and then get the rest of the story.
I agree, but I want to put a twist on it because, and I mean, it was a movie, but it does happen in real life where a child wants to be able to choose, not recognizing that as a child, your choices are limited because we're
Hmm. Hmm.
adults. And if we say certain things, that's the way it has to go.
Right. Hmm.
But so the child has a good relationship with the father. The child is not seeing the father abusing the mother and doesn't understand why the mother needs to divorce this man and why they
Right.
should be living in separate homes. So the child is now with the mother and the mother has a new partner. The child doesn't
Mm.
see the abusive side of the father. This is daddy who buys me everything. So the
Everything, right.
child now decides in her mind, I am not accepting this man. You could be in
Mm-hmm.
love as much as you like. I want my daddy. And then because the child wants the family unit back together and the
Yes.
child wants her father, the child starts making up stories about the
The
stepfather.
stepfather, yes. But you see, the thing about it, and the good thing about it, and the research would also have shown us that there has to be a consistent story. So at some point,
Right?
the story will
That's where
change. And so
professionalism
you
comes in.
recognize, correct. And so at some point, you recognize there are gaps in the story. There's not consistency is what is being said. And the other thing is how the partner was introduced. And
Right.
so we always, this is why I was telling Mr. Fields last night, that I don't necessarily agree with this single parenting concept, because it comes across as us or me and the world, as opposed to that we all are parenting you together. And
Right.
if the father, albeit that he may have been violent to the mother, would come to the realization that, listen, I have to do what's best for my child and what's
Yes.
best for me and the relationship. But there would have been gaps in the story and little
Mhm.
inconsistencies that would have made you realize eventually that no, this child is really making up. And nothing is wrong with them wanting their family units. Nothing is wrong
Mhm.
with the children saying, because we have teenagers whose parents separate for whatever reason, and they say, I want my family unit because that's just the nature of how it goes. But with love, with communication, again, with talking them through, with understanding their emotions and how they feel, you get them to realize that, you know, I am not in this alone. My mother loves me,
Right.
my father loves me, the new partners love me, and I have a circle of love that I can grow and be strong in. So, yes, we do have situations where we would have had children who would have given us a story and then recanted. But when you do the history, you realize that even in the recanting, there was some trace of something that was
Right.
happening. Yeah.
Do you think we also need to, find a way, have an initiative, talk them through in terms of the parents, whether victim or perpetrator, in terms of if this situation is not working out? And for the sake of yourself, the other person, and your children, you all have to go separate ways. I think there must be a code of conduct in terms of a time frame where it is socially and morally acceptable for you to bring another individual into this child's
Mm.
space. Because you
Yes.
have
Yes.
children with about 10 uncles and
Oh,
about
yes.
10 aunts. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know who is who, whether
Correct.
it's the
Correct.
male jumping from woman to woman, or it's the woman
Mm-hmm.
jumping, as we say, colloquially, jumping from man to man. And you're confusing your child emotionally, mentally, spiritually, because who is who?
Correct. And so this is why the communication is important. This is why understanding who you are, you see, and it goes back to us having an awareness of what is healthy, what we need, what is society accept or not accept. And so for a lot of women, and this is also the reality, because I don't know who I am, I think
Exactly.
what makes me feel good about myself is a partner.
Right.
So I have to have another partner, or I have to have someone else in my life rather than take the time. And which is why we always talk about getting the help. Throughout Denise's story, she said, get someone to talk to, get
Right.
someone to
Yes.
confide in, find some support system. And the reason we tell persons that is so that you can talk through the issues, and that would help you to understand, listen, I need to find back myself. I need to
Hmm.
recenter, repurpose before I move on to
Right.
another relationship. Introduce the child, and like you're saying, the child gets confused, but even the adult is confused because, I
Based
mean,
on the
you're
behavior. Yeah.
still tied up emotionally to one person, and then you move on to another.
Hmm.
So we always have to encourage that dialogue. This is why we tell children who are going through divorce or who have been victims themselves to journal, because it's in talking it out, it's in
Yes.
writing it out, you get the emotions out, you get the feelings
Correct.
out, you get the confusion out. And so we really do have to start talking more. When Mrs. Manning said about those values round table, I tell you, a light bulb went off in my
Yes.
head,
Yes. I'm so
because we
looking
now
forward to
have,
that.
and the reality is that we have values. I mean, your values are what are your core, but we have adapted value systems from all, because we are global, we're so connected now. We have value systems from all over the world that we have adopted in Trinidad. And so we now need to revisit, what are our
Agreed.
values as Trinidadians? What are our
Exactly.
values
What are
as
they?
families, as women, as men? And so I think that, we really, I look forward to having that values roundtable discussion, simply
Definitely.
because it will allow for the dialogue and allow for what you have just spoken about. When is it acceptable? You know,
Yes.
I mean, and we know you're not bound by society, but you're bound by what is helpful for you as the individual,
And the
and
children.
the children, and so that you don't make the same mistakes, or
Hmm.
you pay attention to some of the red flags and the indicators. And I know
Yes.
when we have the mental health person coming on, that will be one of the things I want to talk
Correct.
to him about. What are the red flags? Because you see it, but we have to continue to do what we have to
Oh,
do. I mean,
definitely.
the support systems, we have families in actions, we have all these
So many
NGOs that
CSOs and
are
NGOs
there,
involved in stuff.
correct, that are there, who are available for counseling and for that level of support, both for children and adults.
Wonderful. I'm just looking at some of the feedback from the chat. I want to say good evening to directors Williams and Kwamina, and also Claude Dillon. We have men on the line. We have testosterone.
Good, good,
Diane
good.
Chattergoon. I mean, Alison is saying she agrees with the discussion surrounding the time frame. There must be some sort of you can't just finish today, run tomorrow. And I think,
Correct, correct.
how do you separate a child from their mother when the mother is the one who needs to deal with some issues so that she doesn't interfere with the child? It's so much to talk about, Marsha. I
Correct,
really
correct.
believe that the discussion goes beyond 16 days of activism.
Yes, it does.
The
Yes, it does.
conversation goes beyond the 16 days of activism, because we're now at 6:28. We have 2 more minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, time literally
and
flies.
and we correct, and we were wondering, okay, without the child, but the discussion is rich, because it's a discussion that needs to be had. It's a discussion
Hmm.
that needs to be had. I mean, we do say everyone is an individual, and so
Hmm.
what might work for you may not work for me, because my
Correct.
strength is different from your strength. What I'm able to cope with, you may not be. But yes, I do agree that there must be a healing time. Just like there are
Definitely.
stages of grief, there is a healing period that
Which
needs
is
to
where the
happen,
self-awareness comes in.
correct, before
Hmm.
you can adequately move on to a new relationship and introduce your children to these new relationships and set boundaries. And that's
That's
another
right.
thing that we've stopped doing in relationship. We've stopped setting boundaries about what is acceptable and what is not
Yes.
acceptable,
Yes.
even for your children. If we no longer teach. Yes, in schools we talked good touch, bad touch, But it goes more than just the
It's beyond
touching.
that. Yeah.
It's beyond that. It's the boundaries that I set for myself, that my space is my space, and understanding my space, understanding who I am in
Yes.
this relationship, and what do I need, but it's also about empowering, like you said, women stay for myriad of reasons.
Yes.
Financial protector. We are told that the men are providers, protectors. And so if you're coming from that mindset, how do I leave my provider? How do I leave my protector? Rather than say that we are two wholes coming together to make one. Not a
Agreed.
half of anything, not a half of, and the
Exactly.
children are becoming part of that whole. And so the dialogue must continue, Wendy.
I totally agree. So this wraps up day 6, and tomorrow
Yes,
gets really interesting because tomorrow you have a perpetrator that you will be speaking to. So
that's
it's
good. Looking
from the
forward to it.
opposite side of the divide. So I want to
Interview.
say thank you to everyone who was tuned in on the Facebook Live. Thank you so
Yes,
much. Share, share, share. Let's keep the dialogue happening, and I look forward to speaking with you
speaking
again
tomorrow.
tomorrow evening, same time, 6 p.m. on Caribbean Women Honors and Empowerment Facebook Live. Thank you all very much, and good evening.